Peace and blessings, people. Welcome back to the channel. Once again, for those of you, this is your first time with me. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification button so that you'll get notifications when great videos like this come out in the future. Now, today's video, I'm going to be talking about something around nutrition that is probably one of the #1 risk factors for obesity. Okay, while we're so overweight and obese here in America, 75% of the population. But it's also a leading contributing factor as to why we're so frail when it comes to our immune system too. And our immune system is directly related to autoimmune conditions. It's directly related to the pandemic that we just came out of and why so many people were affected and then so many other people were not affected. And so I want to dive into this topic because our nutrition and the way we eat has transformed so much over the last 50 to 7 years. Our food has become industrialized, and to a large part, a lot of our food has become more chemicals than food at all, okay? And one of the things that we saw transform in the 1980s and also 90s was that sugar became ubiquitous in virtually all of the processed foods and foods over the counter that you buy at the grocery store. And so now everything has sugar in it. Ketchup has sugar in it. Tomato sauce for spaghetti has sugar in it. And the reason why that is because we have this sort of genetic predisposition for wanting something that is of a sugar origin, okay? But our natural tendency is towards glucose that comes from fruit, not necessarily things that come from processed foods that didn't exist for most of our ancestors. And so as a result, we've become so used to having sugar in our diets, we really don't understand how much sugar we're consuming today. In my book, Vegucation Over Medication, I dedicated an entire chapter to talking about the subject. It's called The Bitter Truth About Sugar. And in that chapter, I detail how much sugar we're consuming today. We consume, on average, the average American, one person, consumes about 152 pounds of sugar every year. Okay, so think about that when you go to the store and get that 5-pound bag of sugar, and imagine getting about 30 of those and consuming that amount in a year's time. Now, everybody will say I have a sweet tooth. Many people say I have a sweet tooth, and when we say this, we say it almost in a way that, you know, it's benign, as if there's no consequences to it. We just say, I got a sweet tooth. There's nothing I can do about it. But the most important question that we don't ask ourselves is, A, why do we have a sweet tooth for things that are so unhealthy? And B, what is that doing to me? Okay, and so that's what we're going to get in today. What is that sweet tooth doing to me? So, because so many of us have it. I've had it in the past. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got rid of that sweet tooth and started craving things that are actually naturally sweet instead of things that have added sugar to them, okay? And also in that chapter in my book, I also detail there's over 75 different names for sugar. So a lot of times when we're actually going to the supermarket and buying products and we look at the product label and look at the ingredients, we really can't decipher what is and what isn't sugar because there's so many different names for it. So even if we're trying to eat healthy and we're trying to read the labels properly, the food companies have sort of made sure that they can always outsmart us when it comes to that. And then also we don't know how to read labels and determine how much total sugar is in that product as well. So again, sugar is a real issue today in terms of our health. And once we sort of end this video, you'll see how it's impacting our health. And you'll see how it's impacting our health, not only on a small level, but on a big level too. Everything from tooth decay to cancer. Okay, so let's get into it today. I'm gonna break down the 10 ways sugar is actually killing your health so that it'll inspire you to do something about that sweet tooth that is the socially accepted addiction, okay? Because sugar, that's exactly what it is, okay? So the #1 thing, starting with #1, is sugar suppresses the immune system, okay? That's one of the primary things that sugar is going to do to your health. It's going to suppress your immune system. So one of the worst things that you can do when you're sick, when it's cold outside, is to consume sugar. And guess what? When you start to think about it, the times that we consume the most sugar, i.e. The fall during Halloween, and it's, we're going out and getting candy, etc. During the holidays as well, during Thanksgiving and also, Christmas, because we're eating so many pies and cookies and cakes and things of that nature. But also a lot of the sugar that we're not calling sugar, but is sugar, is a lot of the white flours, okay? A lot of the starches. These things turn into sugar in the body as well. And the more that your blood sugar level goes up, the unfortunate consequence of that is that it's not only going to compromise your gut, okay? It's not only going to compromise your gut, but it's also going to compromise your immune system. It's essentially going to paralyze your immune system, okay? So in a time where your body needs to fight off an infection, the unfortunate thing is that it's not going to be able to do that because your immune system is going to be suppressed and paralyzed, okay? So that's one thing that sugar does to your health, okay? Number two, it's also going to, as I mentioned before, it's also going to ruin the good bacteria in your gut called the microbiome. Now, here's why this is so important. Your microbiome is responsible for making roughly around 80% of your immune system, okay? So 80% of your immunity is coming from your gut health, your microbiome, that good bacteria in your gut. And when sugar goes into the gut, it not only ruins that good bacteria, and now that bad bacteria can overgrow, it also loosens these tight junctions that are there to protect you from certain things being absorbed into the bloodstream, okay? And then also inflaming the body and also having the immune system essentially go haywire, okay? So sugar also ruins the gut and increases that permeability. So your gut literally is like this with tight junctions, and the only thing that can get across is vitamins, minerals, amino acids, healthy fats, things of that nature, okay? And then all of a sudden, now these microparticles and large particles of food are coming across. Some of the waste that is in your gut is coming across. And that is truly what is causing your immune system to go crazy, but also is ruining your gut as well too, all right? Number three, frequent urination, especially at night. I talked about this in another video, so please go check that out. But essentially waking up in the middle of the night to pee, a lot of times what happens is you've been eating food throughout the day that has elevated your blood sugar so high that by the time that you get into the bed and your body starts to now process all of this food, because when we wake up in the morning, what are the first things that we do? We go to the bathroom. We either have a bowel movement or we're urinating, okay? Because our bodies are cleansing and detoxifying and healing itself, okay, to get rid of waste. And so what's so important for us to know and understand is that when those blood sugar levels are high, it's going to lead to you increasing the amount of urination, because sugar is essentially acid, okay? Sugar turns into acid and it turns into fat into the body. And guess what? The kidneys remove the body of uric acid, okay? So the higher your sugar levels are, the more uric acid you're gonna produce, and thus you're gonna be getting up in the middle of the night to pee, okay? Another thing, sugar feeds yeast or candida in the body, okay? And candida or yeast isn't just a problem for women. Like when we hear that, we think to ourselves like, yeast infection, that's just for women. But a yeast infection could be a jock itch, okay? A yeast infection could be athlete's foot. A yeast coming out of the body could be identified as dandruff coming out of the scalp. And you'll notice that wherever yeast comes out of the body, it's itchy and irritated, okay? And so that's one of the things that feeds yeast is sugar, okay? Especially at night, you'll notice not only with yeast and parasites, they wake up at night. And when they wake up, they're hungry for sugar. So that's why you tend to crave carbs, starches, sweet things at night, because that yeast and those parasites are waking up in the body. And then we feed it with 152 pounds of sugar that we're consuming on an annual basis, okay? Another issue with consuming sugar and that sweet tooth is that it will lead to what is called fatty liver disease, specifically non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the reason why I'm saying non-alcoholic is because up into the 90s, The only people that we saw with fatty liver disease were people who had problems with alcohol abuse. But today, the vast majority of people who have fatty liver disease are people who are not alcoholics, people who just overconsume sugar. And again, it's not just sugar in the form of sweetness, sugar in the form of white flour, okay? And I'll talk about that in another video, but we are also consuming about 135 pounds of white flour every year, okay? So when we start to look at our plates and see, we'll see the vast majority of what we're consuming is white flour and sugar and starch. All of these things are sugar, okay? But essentially what happens to the body when we're over consuming sugar, the liver has a natural process where it takes excess sugar and it puts it in a stored form called glycogen, okay? Now, the unfortunate fact about excess stored glycogen or excess stored sugar is that it will later be converted into fat. And so the liver becomes very fatty. Instead of having a lot of muscle tissue, now you have a fatty liver. So this is why they call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And as your liver becomes more and more fatty, the unfortunate thing is it loses a lot of its function. And you cannot lose the function of your liver, especially in the very toxic environment that we live in today, because the liver is responsible for removing the toxicity from our bodies, taking those toxins from our foods, from our cosmetic products, from our hygienic products, from the air that we breathe in, from, you know, the water that we bathe in and drink sometimes, taking all of that toxicity and processing. The liver is the master detoxification organ. So when it becomes dysfunctional, you are in big trouble, okay? Another thing that consuming excess sugar or unnatural sugar in the form of high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrose, I can go on and on. Again, as I said before, I talk about this in my book. There's over 75 different names for the type of sugars that they're using in the food that they put in processed unnatural food that most people aren't aware of. But most important is that excess sugar is converted into fat. The same way it is in the liver, is converted into that fat in the body as well too. And so what I typically will notice with people when they're coming to me is that if I see somebody whose midsection of their body is very, very, heavy, okay? If the most of the weight is concentrated in the abdomen area, it tells me that they love carbs and sugar, okay? And so that's always a telltale sign. And so not only is it going to create obesity, but it's also going to create insulin resistance, because as your blood sugars go up, your insulin levels go up. And guess what? Insulin is a fat storage hormone, okay? The more insulin you have in your body, okay, the more it tells the body to store fat, okay? And the same thing with stress. The more cortisol you produce as a result of being stressed, and, consuming sugar actually puts the stress on the body, it will tell the body to store fat. And so this is why consuming excess sugar will not only lead to obesity, but lead to the type of obesity that is concentrated in the abdomen area as well too. The other really unfortunate consequence of consuming a diet high in sugar is that it's going to produce inflammation in the body, okay? It is going to produce, if you feel always inflamed in your back, in your knees, a lot of times, what I find is that when people take sugar and flour out of the diet, all of a sudden they don't have arthritis anymore. They're not inflamed in the body. And inflammation is essentially, ubiquitous in the body and the population today because we're over consuming sugar. And sugar is an irritant to the body, and irritation leads to inflammation, okay? And it doesn't matter where the inflammation is. The inflammation in your stomach is called gastritis. If it's in your knees, we'll call it arthritis. If it's in your lungs and the bronchioles, we'll call it bronchitis, okay? But it doesn't matter that it's concentrated in one place or the other. When you consume sugar, you're feeding that inflammation. You're feeding the fire instead of putting it out. Really, really important. The other thing is excess sugar will lead to multiple chronic diseases. So everything from kidney disease to heart disease to type 2 diabetes to high blood pressure. The more sugar you consume that is unnatural, it will contribute to all of those diseases. And when you start to think about it, high blood pressure, heart disease, most people will associate salt with that at first. But it's not just the salt. It could be mostly the sugar that you're consuming in your diet, that sweet tooth, that socially accepted addiction. Okay, so if you're having a problem with your kidneys, you're having a problem with type 2 diabetes, and even to some level type 1 diabetes, because in the 1980s and 90s, it wasn't even called type 1 and type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes and then juvenile onset diabetes, because type 1 diabetes was only in children who were born with it, quote unquote. And the reason why I put quote unquote, because most children aren't necessarily born with a type 1 diabetes. Most of them develop between ages 0 and 3. Okay, so that's why I say it's sort of air quotes. But the point I'm trying to make is that the same way non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now the name, and it used to be primarily most of the population was, and when it came to fatty liver disease, were people who had alcohol abuse. The thing is that it's really important for us to understand that type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, they initially started as adult onset and juvenile onset, and now you have adults getting type 1 diabetes. Okay, and I think that's really, really important for us to understand, because we have so much sugar in the population today that now people are going from type 2 to type 1. Okay, and it goes that way because of the severity. Okay, so that's really, really important. So a lot of chronic diseases are coming from, excess sugar in the diet. Again, 152 pounds every year. Okay. The next thing is cognitive decline, having some, mental effects as a result of sugar too. It will affect your ability to concentrate. So a lot of people who have an ability to concentrate, who believe that they have ADD or ADHD, it could be because you're consuming too much sugar, okay? Because it affects the brain. It also increases the risk for Alzheimer's, and it also increases the risk for dementia as well, okay? And now, this is the really crazy thing, they're calling dementia type 3 diabetes, okay? So just imagine that. They're calling dementia type 3 diabetes. And there's a reason for that, because they're directly connected to issues with blood sugar and inflammation, okay? So you can see how sugar is impacting the population as well too. And here's the crazy thing. We're seeing people who are having signs of dementia in their late 30s and 40s now, okay? There used to be this disease of the elderly population, but now we're starting to see people experience some of the side effects and symptoms of dementia in their late 30s and 40s, and that is going to increase. And, simple things like headaches, consistent and chronic headaches and inability to concentrate, these are signs that you're headed in that direction. So it's important for us to know and understand we have to cut that off with prevention beforehand. So cutting down the amount of sugar in our diet is very important for that reason. And then the last thing and one of the most important things is sugar feeds cancer, okay? The more sugar you have in your body, what we've been able to sort of determine based on, our tests, like the PET scan, okay? When you do a PET scan, what they're doing is putting labeled sugar in the body. And then what they do is they detect that radioactive sugar in the tissues. They see where that sugar is being consumed the most in the tissues, and that will tell them where the cancer is in the body, okay? So that tells us that cancer loves sugar. So when we consume too much sugar, we're feeding cancer. And this is a whole nother video, but we'll talk about how you can starve cancer in another video, okay? So those are the ways that sugar literally kills your health. And I'll give you a few other bonuses. It also leads to acne. It also causes hormonal imbalances. And it also leads to infertility in both men and women, Okay, so if you enjoyed this video, I know there's so many people out there who have that sweet tooth, that socially accepted addiction. If you enjoyed this video, comment below. Let me know what hit home for you. And let me know what other content you would like me to produce in association with Behind Sugar. And also, just to give you a resource, my book, Vegucation Over Medication, I have an entire chapter dedicated to how do you know what sugars there are out there and why it's so dangerous, but also anybody out there who's done my detox, what you'll notice is that your taste buds shift. You don't necessarily have the sweet tooth anymore. And not only that, you actually crave foods that are actually good for you. Okay. So thank you. Thank you so much for supporting the content. Until the next time, peace and blessings and Godspeed.